Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. If you're someone who really appreciates structure, clarity, and just getting straight to the absolute core of complex ideas, well, you are in exactly the right place today. We're about to undertake a pretty intense macro to micro decoding of a remarkably dense piece of theological text. We are going to look at the pure architecture of a sacrament, literally taking a microscope to just one single paragraph from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1131. Our goal today isn't just to read words on a page, but to uncover the profound structural logic hidden right there inside them. To properly frame our deep dive, it's really helpful to look at the context provided by our source material today. CatholicCulture.org notes a very specific liturgical date for this, June 23rd, the Vigil of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. And honestly, this detail is a fantastic reminder that the text we're about to analyze isn't just some abstract philosophical document collecting dust on a library shelf. It's part of an active, living tradition. It's a framework utilized day in and day out across a massive global calendar. But for ancient traditions to survive and thrive like that, they require sharp, unmistakable clarity for a new generation. And that is exactly what this text attempts to provide. All right, here is the text in its entirety. It reads, "The sacraments are efficacious signs of grace, instituted by Christ and entrusted to the Church, by which divine life is dispensed to us. The visible rites by which the sacraments are celebrated signify and make present the graces proper to each sacrament. They bear fruit in those who receive them with the required dispositions." Okay, wow. If hearing that just felt like hitting a brick wall of theological jargon, you are definitely not alone. It is incredibly dense. But don't worry, my promise to you right now is that we are going to rescue you from that confusion. So what does this actually mean? How in the world do we translate this high-level theology into a functional everyday understanding? Well, to do this, we're going to use a sort of close-reading decodering approach. We're going to break this paragraph down into its component parts, literally word by word, and rebuild it so we can see the exact mechanics of what's being claimed here. But before we dissect the words themselves, we first have to understand exactly where this paragraph is located. Context is everything here, the breadcrumb trail, if you will. Let's walk through this deeply nested four-step structure. We start at the macro level with step 1, part 2, which is the celebration of the Christian mystery. Then we zoom in to step 2, section 1, the sacramental economy. Zoom in again to step 3, chapter 1, the paschal mystery in the age of the Church. And finally, we land at step 4, article 2, the paschal mystery in the Church's sacraments. This perfectly illustrates just how granular, organized, and systematically built this text is. It's a literal architecture. By the time we arrive at paragraph 1131, we are already deep inside a meticulously constructed framework of logic. Now, what's really interesting about part 1, the source, is the absolute origin point. Let's isolate that very first sentence. The sacraments are efficacious signs of grace, instituted by Christ and entrusted to the Church. Notice the chain of custody right there. The text establishes an immediate hierarchy. They are instituted by Christ, meaning they have a divine origin point. And they are entrusted to the Church, meaning the Church acts as the custodian, or essentially the manager of these signs. But the real heavy lifting in this sentence comes from two very specific words. The first word is efficacious. In normal conversation, we might just call something a sign and leave it at that. But the text specifies these are efficacious signs. So what does that mean? Efficacious means producing the intended result. It means these aren't just passive symbols. Think of a stop sign on the street. It's a passive symbol. It tells you to stop, but it doesn't physically force your car's brakes to engage. An efficacious sign, however, actively accomplishes the very thing it represents. It's an active, successful force. The second vital word here is grace. What exactly is this efficacious sign producing? Well, the text explicitly defines grace in the exact same sentence as divine life that is dispensed to us. Actually, I love that word, dispensed. It implies a tangible, active handing out of something. So grace isn't framed here as just a nice thought or a warm, fuzzy feeling. The text frames it as actual divine life being actively distributed straight to the recipient. When we put those definitions together, a remarkably clean, logical pipeline emerges. Instituted by Christ at the very top, entrusted to the Church as the steward in the middle, and dispensed to us, the recipients, at the bottom. It's a direct, unbroken flow of divine life moving from the highest origin straight down to the human level. Okay, moving on to part 2, the mechanism. If this divine life is actively being dispensed, how do these signs operate in actual physical practice? The Catechism explains it exactly like this. The visible rites by which the sacraments are celebrated signify and make present the graces proper to each sacrament. This sentence is entirely focused on the actual mechanics. It bridges the gap between that divine origin we just talked about and the physical reality of human beings living in a very material world. Notice the brilliant contrast being set up here. On one side, you have visible rites. These are the physical celebrations, the tangible actions you can actually see with your eyes, hear with your ears, touch with your hands. They are completely worldly actions. On the other side, you have the graces proper. This is the invisible spiritual reality. According to the text's mechanics, the visible action fundamentally triggers the invisible reality, literally making it physically present in the moment. The visible mechanism unlocks the invisible grace. So the crucial point is, well, up until now, this has been a pretty abstract structural pipeline. But right at the end, the text makes a massive pivot in part 3, the reception. The paragraph concludes with this sentence: "They bear fruit in those who receive them with the required dispositions." Did you catch the sudden dramatic shift in language there? We went from talking about architecture, rigid institutions, and mechanisms to suddenly using this very organic agricultural imagery, bearing fruit. This introduces a strict, absolute condition for the person participating in the sacrament. The fine print here lies in the phrase required dispositions. Unpacking this changes absolutely everything about how we understand the text. A required disposition means the necessary human readiness and the intentional mindset to receive. The text is plainly stating that you cannot just be a passive, unthinking vessel. For the sacrament to bear fruit, to actually work effectively as an efficacious sign, the mindset and the intention of the receiver is an absolute, non-negotiable requirement. This creates such a fascinating contrast between action and reaction. We have the overarching action, the divine institution of the sacraments, perfectly structured, handed down, and entrusted to the Church. But completely balancing that out, we have the mandatory reaction, the highly subjective human readiness required to complete the entire process. The divine action is constant, sure, but according to this paragraph, it is the human reaction that determines if the event actually bears fruit. And this brilliantly illustrates the true complexity of paragraph 1131. When we bring all three of these parts together into one cohesive understanding, we get the complete picture. We have the source, a divine pipeline instituted by Christ. We have the mechanism, visible rites making invisible graces undeniably present. And finally, we have the reception, the absolute necessity of the human mind being ready and willing to receive it. It really is a perfect three-part architectural blueprint. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. We've just mapped out the massive structural hierarchy and the rigid architecture of these religious rites. But based on a really close reading of this text, does the ultimate power of a sacrament fundamentally rest not just in the rite itself, but in the psychological and spiritual readiness of the human being receiving it? It's kind of a mind-blowing paradox, isn't it? That an institution so vast and ancient ultimately relies on the quiet intentionality of the individual human mind to bear fruit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this breakdown provided you with the clarity and structure you need to view this text in a whole new light. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.